our surprise and way beyond our hopes and expectations, was very, very successful. So I'd like to begin by thanking all of the scholars, academics, students, especially a very large number of students in many different parts of the world, but especially here in Pakistan, which I became familiar with. So I'd like to thank, and the general public. So I'd like to thank all of the people who tuned in to our series, which was very edifying for us as well, which, as you know, was, or maybe you don't, was the investigation primarily of the enormous impact of colonialism on the form and formation, the forms and formation of modern Islam, of contemporary Islam, an archive that is hidden in plain sight sometimes, but we received analysis of that moment throughout the academic year in that series. The other focus of our series was if it's Islam after colonialism, it necessarily implies a before. So we had many talks and often references in the other talks as well to pre-colonial Muslim forms and formations. And then, of course, there's the third moment of the future, the moment of potentiality, possibility of alternatives, all of which, of course, is not entirely divorced from the past and the present, naturally. So this series, I mean, it remains in the same constellation, but we decided to focus more closely on, because in any decolonial project, the question is, okay, what now, or what are the potentialities? Yeah, some of those potentialities are, of course, once again, hidden in plain sight because of the kinds of knowledge formations in which we operate with, and the concepts that we bring to our observations, which obscure many things which are part of our experience. So without further ado, I'll turn to my colleague from the University of Exeter, Professor Sajjad Rizvi, who is the director of the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies at Exeter, to introduce our very distinguished speaker today. It's really an honor to have him. Sajjad.
Yes, thank you, Nauman, and a welcome from me to everyone as well to this new series, this new year of seminars. And as Nauman said, if last year was really about the political analysis and questions of theory, in many ways this is going to be about presence and also of futures. Futures, what in the decolonial literature is known as the pluriversal options that will come. So I'm quite excited by the lineup we already have. We've already posted the list of our talks for this term, and I hope everyone will join us and continue to join us for this. Today, of course, it is a pleasure to introduce, and I've said this before, these series are an excuse for us to kind of reacquaint ourselves with old friends, and to then kind of introduce them to people who might not be familiar with them, reintroduce them to people who are. It's a pleasure to introduce an old friend, Professor Cyrus Zargar, who is the al-Ghazali Distinguished Professor in Islamic Studies at the University of Central Florida. I've known Cyrus for quite a while, and he is really one of the most interesting people writing on not just aesthetics. His first book was a bit more on the aesthetic side, and his last book was more on ethics. So the last book, which is called The Polished Mirror, which Nauman is trying to hold up, but there it is. The Polished Mirror, Storytelling in the Pursuit of the Virtues in Islamic Philosophy and Sufism, is really a wonderful work, which I think since it came out about 4 years ago, it's probably being extensively used in courses on ethics in Islam and Islamic ethics, and deserves to be so, quite simply because it reminds us of simple things like why did Sufis tell stories? Why were things like works like Sadi so popular? far beyond the borders of what was and is now Iran. So it's a pleasure to welcome Cyrus, and today he will be giving a talk on Islamic ethics, modernity, and the films of Majid Majidi. So without any further delay from me, please, Cyrus, over to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for thank you both for your very kind introductions. It's a pleasure to be here, and I love the topic. Talking about post-colonial literature in this case, or post-colonial film. Let me share my screen 1 second here and confirm with everyone that you can see. Yeah. Okay. So I'll go full screen. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the conversations today. So words on screen: Islamic ethics, modernity, and the films of Majid Majidi. In some senses, I think, at least where I come from, the department that I've come from, the background that I've come from, it can seem strange to study a filmmaker, and that's because, well, I mean, I've worked almost entirely with texts. And I think a lot of us who work in classical Islamic studies, or even beyond, I mean, anything other than studying contemporary Islamic studies, we work with texts. But I think the most fascinating thing about Majidi that drew me to Majidi is that he is a careful reader of the very same texts that I'm reading and studying. It's one thing for a filmmaker to drop an allusion to Fariduddin Attar. I mean, it can be done in a very clumsy way. I've seen it done in an Iranian soap opera where this old man who has fallen in love with a young woman stands up in the mosque and someone else is talking, just brings out the Sheikh of San'an, mentions it. That's not how Majid Majidi does this. I mean, his readings are so subtle that I've often been deep into the text of, let's say, Attar's Musibat Nameh, or in some lesser known portion of the Masnavi, and have found an allusion in his films. So he's a careful reader of classical Sufi, especially Persian Sufi texts. But on the other side, he's a filmmaker, and as a filmmaker, and as an informed filmmaker, he's someone who is thinking about life in contemporary Iran, and he seems to me to be in touch with some theory outside of just Sufism and Islamic philosophy. I won't talk about that today, but I've been interested in some of the things I've seen in his films that seem to indicate to me that he's been either reading Jacques Lacan, or reading about Jacques Lacan. So that's what Majid Majidi is to me, as someone who studies mostly classical Sufi literature. It's the meeting of Sufi thought, Sufi practices, Sufi literature, face to face with modernity. And modernity where? Modernity in Iran. And so because it's modernity in Iran, then by its nature, we're talking about post-colonial film, because it's dealing with a country that famously has encountered the clashes of West and non-West, or of the developed and the developing, or the whatever you want to call it. I mean, it's right at the center of many of those debates. What originally put Majid Majidi on the map, okay, and I think this is a point I want to make before I get into any of his films. What originally put Majid Majidi on the map were films that focused on the Iran element, right? The social hardships in Iran, poverty, things like that. And I think that matters. I think it matters that filmmakers who focus on social issues in countries like Iran become noticed before those who want to say something artistically that might not have a political, ideological dimension. Filmmakers seem to know that. But Majid Majidi, I give him credit for breaking free from it. And not to say that he doesn't focus on social issues. He does, but he seems to be wanting to say things much more than that. Let me explain to you what I mean. So there was an argument made by Frederick Jameson in the late 80s. And it's a famous article that came out in the journal Social Text called Third World Literature in the Era of Multinational Capitalism. And in that article, Frederick Jameson makes the case that what he calls third world literature is national allegory by nature. So third world authors are, at least those that he knows, and he tries to spread it as far as he can. Third world authors, if there's something in the text that's happening, if there's a character, the character represents the whole. The character represents the nation. And to him, this is what makes third world literature difficult to appreciate from an aesthetic perspective for a Western audience. So this is what he says. If that seems kind of raw and to generalize things too much to you, I mean, you'll be glad to know that someone has already responded. People have already responded to the article, and it is a good article. I mean, it's worth considering his argument. But Ajaz Ahmed in 1987, the year after Jameson's article was published, in the same journal, published Jameson's Rhetoric of Otherness and the National Allegory. And in that, he questions the very terms that Jameson's using. So he, using Urdu literature, actually, shows that not all contemporary literature can be called, that comes from the quote unquote third world, can be called national allegory. And over and beyond that, and I think the most interesting part of his argument is, where is the third world? And he begins to show that the third world exists in the poorest neighborhoods of America too. And so, it's even a difficult concept to put your hands on, to say that the third world is here or there. But the point that has always sat with me, and Ajaz Ahmed says this, is that what Ahmed says is that the literature that reaches us, the third world literature that reaches us, and by the way, when I say literature from now on, let's add film to that, is that which is translated. And that which is translated is that which is national allegory. So let me give you an example from Iranian cinema. And it's one of my favorite films, but look at A Separation, Asghar Farhadi, if you've seen it. It's a beautiful film. I mean, it's one of the best written films that I've seen in a long time. That being said, does it meet the criteria of being national allegory? Yes. I mean, you can't get away from that film without having a heavy sense that he's talking about Iran. Now, you might not know exactly what he's saying about Iran, but the film is about Iran. And it's about, I mean, if you haven't seen the film, I won't go through the whole thing, but the very setup of the film is that there's a husband and wife who want to get a divorce. Why? Because the wife wants to go abroad. They don't say where, and the husband doesn't. So immediately you know that something is being said about Iran versus the more developed, whether it be Germany or America. It's not clear where she wants to go. I don't remember. And as I said, Majidi's early films that won awards, Asghar Farhadi's film won an Oscar. Majidi's first film that went so far as to get nominated for the Best Picture at the Academy Awards was Bachaye Osman, Children of Heaven. And that definitely was national allegory. It's the story of two poor kids who have to share a pair of shoes. That's the crux of it. I mean, you can't get away from issues of Iran and poverty by watching it. But I think what Majid Majidi has done in his other films, and those have gotten attention too. I should say many of his films, I won't go through the awards and the accolades, they've gotten attention in Canada and France, but what he's been doing in his other films is really quite profound. It's fine, there might be some national allegory here. There might be some issues about Iran here and poverty, but he's talking about the human condition in the contemporary world. He's speaking about something much more broadly. He takes it to an ethical level. He starts to talk about even moral universals in his films. And and they become not about an Iranian dealing with modernity, but a human being dealing with modernity. And that's what I think post-colonial film can do that, let's say, Frederick Jameson missed, is that it can take the mirror and not point it, say, listen, I'm the other. Now look here, look at yourself and see, here's me talking to you. Here's the colonized talking to the colonizer, or however you want to put it. But to dig deep into the tradition and say, listen, this is something that the world can learn about the human condition today that they didn't know before, they didn't know before, they didn't consider before. This is some perspective that's missing. And to offer that missing perspective, as I said, what Majid Majidi does is go quite deeply into the Persian Sufi literary tradition, especially Attar and Rumi, but others as well. So that's by way of introduction. That's what I wanted to say to introduce why Majid Majidi might matter to us, and why he's mattered to me, and why I think he has something to say. So I thought I'd start with this quote from Plotinus, a lovely quote, but there have to be caveats here. So when Plotinus's friend Emilius asks him to make a bust of him, a statue of him, this is Plotinus's response. Oops, sorry about that. My own picture is blocking the quote. Why really is it not enough to have to carry the image in which nature has encased us without your requesting me to agree to leave behind a longer lasting image of the image, as if it were something genuinely worth looking at? Now, again, caveats here. I'm not trying to draw some deep and lasting connection between Neoplatonism and Sufism. But what I like about this, and what I think it gets us to think about, is this metaphysical interest in pushing back against image centrism, to look at the world, to look at at form and images, those that we see at least, as kind of having a kind of temporary quality to them, right? To think about higher universal principles, to think about truths that transcend just image and form, the things that we see with our senses. It's a very metaphysical concern. And in that sense, I think it's the antithesis of what we would call the modern. That's what I hope to get to today. That if what I'm going to keep referring to as modernity, that's not one perfect thing. No, Western culture is not one perfect thing, but there is a sense in the popular media that I see, and that many of you've seen, of a kind of trend, a trend of life, a trend in the way we live, that focuses on images and idealized images, and I'll get to that later toward the end of it, not to say that we're just dealing with appearances, but it's a function of late capitalism for us to be focused on the material, right? And if any art form brings the image to life and is image centric and is the most modern of all art forms, it is the cinematic, it is cinema, it is film, right? And that's what I think makes Majidi, again, so interesting. Majidi is coming at film with this Plotinus quote view, right? The meaninglessness of the image as an image. He's coming with that kind of perspective, but he is working in image. Images are his medium. He's a director. And if you've seen a Majid Majidi film, what you know is that his strength is in the visual. There's different kinds of directors. Some are good at showing action sequences, dialogue. Some bring a script to life. Majid Majidi, more than many other Iranian directors, and even directors worldwide that I know, can tell a story with images, but probably better than anyone. Right. So that's an interesting, almost paradox or dilemma in his work, that he's pushing back against image centrism, but image centric himself. So how does he push back against? let me just say, I forgot to mention, let's see what my next slide is here. Hold on one second. Oh yeah. Let me stay here for just 1 minute. I won't have time to get into some of the theoretical background of image centrism, late capitalism, a lot of those things. I hope to maybe at the end. Much of what I say to you today comes from 2 articles that I've written, and I hope I can mention them at the end. I can mention them now. They're open access, and you can read. If you really want to get my argument, you can just Google them and pull them up. They're free. The first one is called Allegory and Ambiguity, and the second one is called The Gaze and a Sufi Ethics of Vision. And I'm drawing from both of those today. So if I'm skipping things and there seem to be kind of holes in my argument, please forgive me. But one of the things that I want to point out was Walter Benjamin. He's the one who made that famous statement about film, that it trains us. It alters our perception, becomes a training ground for us to become acclimated to distraction, right? So we become distracted because our whole world becomes dominated by images that have been, human, artificial images that human beings create. Okay, so let's jump into Majid Majidi and talk about his first film, the first film that I want to discuss. How am I for time? Okay. So this film is called Rang-e Khuda. Now, Rang-e Khuda would be translated as the color of God. And I believe that to be a reference to the ayah Sibghatullah, the coloring of God in the Quran. Unfortunately, I think the color of God was too odd of a title for English language audiences, and it was translated as the color of paradise, which makes less sense, and in fact misses the central theme of the film. The central theme of the film being a young boy who finds God in the world around him, even though he's blind. Now, both films that I'll talk about today, both of them have blind protagonists. So immediately you should ask yourself this question. In a film about a blind protagonist, in a visual medium with protagonists who cannot see, what is the director saying? Well, he's clearly talking about our access to the visual world, and he's thinking about the meaning of vision, right? By giving us blind protagonists, he must be doing that, right? So the way he does it in Rang-e Khuda is he gives us a young boy named Muhammad. And Muhammad is, he studies at a school for other young blind children in Tehran. Here he's learning Braille. Braille is one of the major themes of the film. Muhammad takes this ability to read by touching everywhere with him. He'll touch trees, or he'll hear the sound of a bird and he'll tap it out. He seems to be reading the universe through his hands. That, to me, by the way, suggests the human ability to interpret the universe, to read the universe, to find meaning in the universe, not to make meaning, to find meaning as revealed. In fact, in Majid Majidi's films, names mean a lot. He's named Muhammad because in the way that he can discover the meaning that God has imbued, God has given to the universe, the way that he can discover that meaning, the way that he receives meaning, is much like the way the Prophet Muhammad received revelation. And there's parallels to them throughout the film. His father, on the other hand, you can see here, is a troubled man. He comes to pick up his son. He doesn't even want to pick up his son. He wants to see if he can leave him at the school. And the people at the school say, well, we can't keep him the whole summer. So he's forced to take his son back to his village. He's a widower. He has 2 daughters and this blind son. He's fine with the daughters, but he sees his son as getting in the way of this marriage that he wants to accomplish in his life. There's a woman in the village that he's in love with. And here you see him shopping in Tehran. I keep saying in Tehran because Tehran, the space here matters. Tehran versus the village, rural village, urban Tehran. In Tehran, he's buying jewelry for the proposal process. He wants to propose and marry her. I said he's a troubled man. I think you can see it in his face here. You'll notice what Majid Majidi has done. The gaze, for those who know Lacanian theory, I mean, he's looking at the mirror, and do you notice it's double. That matters. Why is it double? Well, there's something that comes up in Persian poetry of a person who sees double, ahvad, the cross-eyed person who sees double. Doubleness, or what Attar calls what I translate as two-facedness, having two faces. It usually has to do with being tied to the dunya, or seeing creation as having some value aside from God, as opposed to having value because of God, right? His two-facedness comes also from his love of worldly things. Again, what is he looking at? Gold, right? What is gold? It's meaningless. It's a shiny metal. It's the glitz and glamour. For those of you who know Surah Zukhruf, the surah in the Quran where God basically talks about the meaninglessness of gold and silver and shiny objects, right? It's a shiny object that he seeks. His attachment to the dunya, his attachment to the worldly things, has brought about this split in his personality. And that's the two faces that you see here. One of the split is between his true nature, the higher, truer nature that his son embodies, right? As a created being who should be receptive toward God, someone who should be grateful. And this new artificial nature that seeks glitz and glamour, that seeks worldly things, and most importantly, that brings him to despise his son. And that's really the driving thing, plot point in this film, is that he despises his son. He wants to be rid of him. He sees his son as being the final obstacle in everything he wants to achieve. He seems to be concerned that the bride he wants to marry, the woman he wants to marry, won't accept the son, and he feels cursed to have lost his wife years ago and now have to raise the son on this blind son on his own. As I said before, the son, on the other hand, is a delightful human being. They go back to the north, back to where the farm where they live in the village, and this is Muhammad's grandmother, who takes his hand to show him how much the fields have grown and how much the trees have grown. And you'll notice there's a kind of gratitude that he has toward nature and a kind of sense of God being everywhere, as he touches things. Forward again. This is as the father as his state deteriorates and he becomes more angry about his life and about having to bring Muhammad back to the village. This is a scene where he's trying to shave and his mirror breaks. But again, just to further my point, look at this. Now he has the duality, right? The two faces. But you'll notice there's more than two, and it's broken. The brokenness inside of him, right? His broken view of the world. He's become completely despondent, and no one can rehabilitate him. No one can show him how he's wrong. Not even his own mother, the grandmother, Muhammad's grandmother, can show him how he's wrong. So what he does to see as another ploy to get rid of his son is he takes his son to this man in the village, a blind carpenter. He's hoping that he can teach his son to be self-sufficient. He teach Muhammad to be self-sufficient, to learn how to carve wood, make things, and stay with this man, and then he wouldn't have to care for him. It's also here that when Muhammad's left alone with this carpenter, that for the first time we see him really lose hope, and he questions why God has made him. Why has God created me? Muhammad asks. But then it's interesting that he says sometimes, and I paraphrase, sometimes I just want to speak to God and tell him all the secrets of my heart. So despite the fact that he's upset, despite the fact that he is naturally suffering and questioning his own state and his blindness and his life, you'll notice the connection that he maintains. Sometimes I want to speak to God and tell him all the secrets of my heart, right? The pains of being blind are a secret that are in his heart. And that he feels the only person he can tell to is God. That matters because it culminates in the conclusion of the film. And by the way, if you haven't seen these films yet, then I owe you an apology because I'm going to ruin both of them. So if you want to mute me or something like that, you better, because I'm about to talk about the ending of the film, and then I'll talk about the next film. Okay, so here we see the father taking Muhammad on horseback, leading him. They're going somewhere. And if you were to be watching it, you'd hear there's, every time the father is about to do an act of evil or does an act of evil, there's a kind of a special bird cry that Majidi has. It occurs right in this scene. As they're crossing this bridge, the bridge breaks. Muhammad falls and his horse falls in the water. And you get a very, very powerful moment in the film. It's a long 30 seconds that the father watches his son in the water and doesn't do anything. Now that's important. 30 seconds might not seem like a long time, but in the film world, it is. It's 30 seconds of him just looking and not responding. But he does. He finally makes the decision to save his son, and then rushes down to him and finds his dead son on the beach. And the final scene of the film, he's holding his Muhammad in his arms and weeping. And then Muhammad's hand lights up and he begins to read Braille. His finger begins to move, as it has done when he would hear the sounds of birds or touching trees. His hand begins to move. Now, I had a friend who also studied kind of religion and film and studied Majidi. And this friend of mine had come to the conclusion that this meant that a miracle had occurred and Muhammad had come back to life. And I hated to be the one to disappoint him, but I don't read it that way at all. If you watch the film, you'll know that when the grandmother dies, she too lights up after her death. It's a way of signifying in Majidi's film a kind of saintliness of the person, a kind of moral beauty of that person. And when the grandma dies, a bird, you see there's a bird flying in the sky. And when Muhammad dies, too, a bird flies in the sky. I mean, probably symbolizing, I would say, the release of the soul, because the birds in these symbolize human souls, as they do in Attar. And by the way, being able to read and interpret the cries of birds, that should probably remind you of Mantiqater, the language of the birds, the speech of the birds, major theme in Attar's long narrative poem that Muhammad can read. But it matters that he has died. In fact, the film wouldn't make sense otherwise, because remember, he wanted to share with God the very secrets in his soul. He had been looking for God throughout the film. He had been trying to read the universe as revealed, as being signs of God. So the fact that he has died means that he can now do that. He's achieved that goal. He's with God, right? Hence Rang Khuda, right? The color of God. It's a beautiful film, and I hope I've done more than plot some. I hope that I've, in a sense, given you the plot in a way that shows you really a kind of logocentrism. That is to say, the centrality of words and meaning, a universe imbued with meaning in Majidi's films. The world as subject to interpretation, and you'll notice the sort of criticism of image centrism, right? Muhammad's life can have meaning even if he's blind. Whereas who's concerned with appearances, outer appearances, images? It's the father. Right? Now, this all becomes a lot clearer in the next film I want to discuss. And I hope I'm okay for time. I think I am. I plan to go for another 20 minutes, if that's good. Okay. Or 15. You guys tell me, 15, 20, what do you think?
15 is good.
15, okay. Then I'll speed it up. Okay. So this one's called The Willow Tree. The Willow Tree is a film about a blind protagonist. This blind protagonist is an adult. Okay. His name is Yusuf. Yusuf is a professor at a university in Tehran. They never tell us which university in Tehran. And he studies actually Rumi. He studies the poetry of Rumi mostly, but he seems to be studying sort of, Irfani poetry. It's not clear. He studies Hafez, Rumi, Persian literature, Sufi Persian literature. And he seems to have a pretty good life, despite his blindness. His wife helps him do everything. In fact, he refers to his wife as an angel. Her name is Roya. By the way, as I say, names always mean something in Majidi's films. He's Yusuf, she's Roya, right? In the Quran, what is the relationship between Yusuf and Roya? Roya, dream, right? A dream vision. And Yusuf, Joseph, the interpreter of dream visions, the dream interpreter. So he loves his life, but well, I'm going to skip this since I'm running short on time. Let me just do the last part. The first part of this part of the Masnavi, which is central to the film. And the Masnavi is a major theme in the film. I mean, the Masnavi, the book of the Masnavi will appear throughout. But the first part is just, I'll skip. It's just about focusing on the inner senses versus the outer senses, focusing on meaning as opposed to form. But let's look at this last couplet. Pass by the goblets of form. Do not stop there. Yes, the wine is in the cup, but it is not of the cup. What are we saying here? Wine being wine and cup. Cup form, wine meaning, right? What the wine glass or wine cup should be is a medium for meaning. What you shouldn't do is get somehow confused and conflate the two, and to think that somehow the two are one, that the cup somehow has some intrinsic relationship with meaning, or that you need the cup. You don't think that the wine somehow is just because it's temporarily shaped by the cup, has some intrinsic relationship with it. So what he's saying is bypass form, see form as just a medium to get to meaning. That's the major theme of the film. In this first scene, I'm going to try to play it. Let's see if it works. Can you hear my sound? You can? Okay, I didn't know if I shared audio or anything. All right.
تو که میتونم پنهان کنم به کسی چیزی نگم یه روز یه هفته یه ماه نمیدونم نگران خودم باشم یا نگران اونا اگه بفهمن چه حالی میشم میتونم تحمل کنن یا نه خیلی خوبه بنداز من حاضرم الان من برنده میشم
There's a lot. Again, I told you, Majidi is really good at speaking, at doing things with images, just visually. So this is the opening scene of the film, and you already learned a few things about our protagonist, our blind protagonist. One is that while he's blind, he's in this kind of state of conversation with God. He has an intimate relationship with God. That's while he's blind. Now, I'll ruin the film for you. He's going to regain his vision later. And that relationship ends when he regains his vision. Two, you'll notice he loves his life. He has a beautiful child. He seems, happy. He'll become worried when he's diagnosed with possibly having cancer in his eye that sends him to France. And when they send him to France, that's when they discover that a corneal transplant can bring his vision back, because he went blind later in life, like when he was 5, not at birth. The third thing is, look at the symbolism. You have two sticks going down a stream. One of them is his, representing him, is stuck halfway. It's the midlife crisis. he's going to become stuck right in the middle of his life with a major problem. And that major problem turns out to be that his vision returns to him. His vision returns to him, and he doesn't really know how to deal with it. So the major problem that he faces is that he had been dealing, before his vision is returned, with a world of meaning. He had been dealing with a world of meaning within himself. Now he's presented with a world of images. And there is a discord between the two, a disconnect. The world of images doesn't fit the world of meaning the way it should. And he'll slowly become obsessed with image and form throughout the film. Just for clarity, how much time do I have? 5 minutes? 5 minutes? All right, then I'll go super fast. I was planning to do the whole film, but I don't think I can. That's okay. You don't need the whole film. You should watch it on your own. So, I'll skip the scenes where he gets his film. This is where he gets his vision back, and again we have the gaze. But I have to show you this, and I'll end on this. I'll skip all the other scenes. I just want to show you this one scene because this is the most pivotal scene in the film that shows you what I mean. So I'm going to show it to you. I didn't explain what's happening. So he's come back to the airport. He's come back to the airport, and there's a place in the airport where he's divided. And there's all these people have come to greet him. They're all behind it, plexiglass. And
sorry, Cyrus,
yes.
could you speak up a little bit? I don't know why, but your voice, the sound is becoming more and more inaudible for some reason.
All right, I'll try to speak up. Can you hear me now?
G?
Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So he doesn't know anyone, he's never seen anyone before. I mean, the last time his eyes worked and he had vision within his spine. So he's looking for someone he can recognize as he arrives at the airport. He sees all these people greeting him, and he becomes confused. Okay, so if you didn't understand what happened, he recognizes his mother, but he can't find his wife. Can you hear me?
Sorry, Cyrus, could you please try turning up the volume on your laptop?
But then you guys gotta give me. Hold on. Let me.
It's a bit faint.
Oh, okay. How about now?
Maybe, yeah,
Oh, there we go.
If it's probably because of the the video you were showing, yeah.
I think the video had turned it down. Yeah.
Okay.
But there's no more video. So hopefully it'll work now. How about now? I'm good? You can hear me?
You're good. Yeah.
I'm almost done. No worries. Okay, so if you didn't understand what happened in that film, in that scene, he finds his mother, but then who's he looking for? His wife. Who do his eyes settle on? Not his wife, a much younger woman who I guess in his view is much more attractive. Why? Remember, his wife, he had described her as an angel. What is he looking for? He's looking for someone whose form is as angelic as she was, right? And who does it land on? It lands on, she's actually a relative, I mean, not blood relative. She's his uncle's sister-in-law, right? Patty. And if you know the Elahi Name of Attar, you know that one of the king of the Patties, one of the sons wants to marry the daughter of the king of the Patties, the fairies, representing obsession with lust. So you see the discord between that the world presents him with, and he makes that choice. He starts to choose meaning. I'm just going to go just quickly through the slides. He's staring here at her, and then he becomes a voyeur. When she visits the house, you'll notice him looking behind the curtains. She's there to drop off a thesis. There he is on the subway, and he's staring at this woman. And you'll notice, what does she have in common with Patty? The artifice, the bleached hair, the excessive makeup. He is obsessed with the glitz and glamour of form, of externalities. And he can't appreciate his wife's qualities anymore. She leaves him. He doesn't seem to care. She's married, by the way, the woman he's staring at the subway, but okay. There's a lot going on in the film. I'll end here. I'll end with that because I promised to end on time. So I'm going to end with that. There's a lot going on in the film, but let me just, in conclusion, say that I think if post-colonial film offers us something through films like this, and through references to Rumi in the film and Sufi ethics, it's that post-colonial film can go not just beyond national allegory. It can become a robust criticism of modern life. And that's what you see in Majidi's films. It's not that Majidi is coming and somehow talking about the state of Iran. He's saying, look at human nature, and look at human nature in the city, look at human nature distracted by images. This is what this tradition, the Quran, Sufi literature, Sufi poetry, Persian Sufi poetry, this is what the tradition can offer for us to think about mitigating an image-centric existence, right? That we all deal with. Commodity fetishism, right? Idealized images. At one point in the film, Yusuf, right at this point, I think, or later, his uncle is trying to give him advice, tell him to go, to make up with his wife and go back to his job. But he's staring at a mannequin, and it's not even a female mannequin; it's just a mannequin on a motorcycle. So he's become obsessed with the form of the form. He's moved that much beyond. His concern with meaning. So I'll end there. I know it was a quick and abrupt ending, but hopefully we'll flesh things out in the discussion. And sorry for going over, but I had these clips and it made it a bit long. Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much. Cyrus, can I ask you to unshare your screen?
Yeah, let me unshare it. Yeah.
That was really lovely. Thank you so much. It really helped me see these films, which I had seen, actually, the films that you're talking about. As it happens, I've been also a fan of Majid Majidi's, but they really opened up the films for me, your talk. The first question that occurred to me earlier, but actually your last remarks about the willow tree and the trap that he gets into the moment he starts seeing through this poor thing, this unsuspecting young lady. immediately reminded me when you said, it's about the makeup and the glitter, etc. Immediately reminded me of Baudelaire's Painter of Modern Life, where Baudelaire actually makes very, very similar remarks about woman in that essay. Yeah. Now Baudelaire also. So this is my question. My first question that occurred to me. Baudelaire also has, and the symbolists after Baudelaire, also have this sense, and there is this stream within modernism of what you were calling logocentrism and images, and using, even if there are images, of course, images are there, but the images themselves are meant to point to something beyond the image, minimally. And it's also the idea that the theme of the fall, of course, Baudelaire is Catholic, the theme of the fall also, another theological idea, or which you might even say does have mystical connotations as well, and does so in Baudelaire as well. So this seems to me, I mean, it seems to me what you're pointing to is something that is actually shared across a range of modernisms, which are, falsely named modernisms. I don't know why it's called modernist, because in fact, so many of these people who are called modernists are traditionalists, in fact, right? Or have a profound sense of loss of the tradition and what it actually means in modern times in particular. So Baudelaire is like that, T.S. Eliot is like that. And modernism in general, just as the modernist novel works against narrative, similarly, modernist poetry, etc., also tries to get away from the image. So in that sense, then, isn't this something that is quite common to the history of modernism? What you're reading of Majid Majidi?
I think there's a shift that happens after, right? Because really, when I kept throwing out the word modernity, but really, what Majidi, if he's at odds with anything, it's postmodernism. And and I agree with you. I mean, if you look at the modernist novelists, there's still kind of a sense of a world with some meaning and things like that. But it's really, as you get into a postmodernist view of the fact that we have to make our own meaning, that's what I think Majid Majidi is at odds with. And by the way, I think it matters that he's at odds with it. So there was a word that before we went live, Sajjad, Dr. Rizvi used a beautiful, beautiful word to describe one of Majidi's films, sentimental, right? And that's true. I mean, if you saw the scene with his mother, his films are sentimental and allegorical. And that is not something, I mean, allegory in postmodern literature, I mean, it might have a place, but it's really a marker of something that's not tied to modernity. And it's brought criticism to Majidi. So if you know Hamid Dabashi, when he writes about Iranian cinema, I mean, he is not a fan of Majidi or his films. If you compare Majidi to the other celebrated Iranian filmmakers like Abbas Kiarostami, the other ones, you could say they're Iranian filmmakers, but they're Iranian postmodernists too. They're very interested in the way the human subject takes a meaningless world and constructs meaning out of it, finds their own sort of autonomous meaning. They create it, But that's what makes, I think, Majidi so interesting, is that he doesn't give in to that. He pushes back against that. He's very in many ways very, very much traditional in his worldview, but at the same time he doesn't ignore the reality of the world he lives in. So he doesn't just make these stories of the prophets kinds of films, and that's why I was criticizing his last film. He takes he takes the Prophet Muhammad, he takes the Quran, and he converts them into moral themes, and then he finds those in contemporary life, and that makes him very different, I think, from the other celebrated Iranian filmmakers.
Right. It's also, I mean, in terms of tradition, it's very much directly, which is very, very common in poetry also. Al-Majazzu Kantarat al-Haqiqa.
Very much. That's the theme. That's the clear theme. Yeah. So,
and the relationship of that to, I mean, so because when you were talking about Range Khuda, the question of touch, it's really interesting that, of course, touch is whether you're talking about sight or you're talking about hearing or you're talking about smelling or you're talking about tasting. All of them are, in fact, modes of touching, because even in terms of seeing, if there's a light has to go in and touch your retina. Sound has to come and touch your eardrum. So fundamentally, all the senses are in fact touch. That would make touch the most foundational or essential sense. And the most interesting thing about that is it's also just both in English and in a different way in Urdu or Arabic or Persian, I would. So sense and sensibility, sense and sensitivity, sense itself having two senses. On the one hand, the tactile sense, and on the other hand, meaning. And it's the same with, well, hiss and ehsas feeling, and somebody who is sensitive is hassas. So it's very interesting that touch itself, which is the most material, also have this sort of vertical.
That's a very profound point, actually. You know, it's interesting if you look at the psychologies, like, you know, Islamic philosophy of pre-modern psychologies that talk about the senses. Vision is always placed as the highest, right? Vision is the most direct. It's kind of all-encompassing. But I think that's the interesting thing you're pointing out too, is that when you go to let's say a lower sense like touch, you also become less able to confuse it with ultimate reality, right? So you could see the world of vision as being truly real and truly perfect. And it's not. It's not in a metaphysical sense, a moral sense. I mean, it's not even in a scientific sense, right? But you can become confused in that sense. But Muhammad and someone who's using the sense of touch, that confusion won't happen. They realize that they're doing their best to make sense of the world, and won't get confused with some ultimate reality. So I think that's a great point about touch.
Yeah. Sajjad?
Yes, I want to, in a sense, continue that by looking at this whole question of, well, you know, pretty much all of us who work in, I guess, the study of religion, we're faced with this seeming problem of, you know, how do we convey to students, particularly, you know, in contexts where they're so alienated from any notion of spirituality, how do you convey to them what spirituality is, right? And, you know, what medium do you use? What sort of text can convey the sort of meaning and the sort of conceptions and sorts of cognitions and embodied practices which spirituality entail? And in many ways, I think what you suggested rather interestingly is the way in which, I mean, clearly these films are extremely useful for that, right? Because they show that spirituality is not necessarily the sort of material rupture that we expect, or even the sensory rupture that we expect, but rather there are different kinds of continuities involved, and there's a certain kind of ambiguity perhaps of the image as well. So you know, you can't completely do without the image, right? So the image is still there because the image is bearing meaning, and the question is whether one stops at the image or whether one goes beyond it. And that reminded me of the you know, the famous, as I'm sure, well, you definitely do know, the discussion in Henri Corbin on the distinction between the icon and the idol, which in some ways is the ultimate, it's become perhaps the biggest problem of modern religion, is not being able to distinguish between the two. Right? Yeah. Religion, spirituality, the practice of spirituality can't actually do without images or without forms of representation. The question is how you deal with that form and how you deal with that representation.
That's a beautiful point. And it's interesting that a lot of the discussions.
It's a comment, not really a question, but yeah.
No, it's a good comment. I have used Majidi in the classroom to great success, because one of the mistakes that someone like me can make, if I'm talking about, let's say, a lot here, Sufi text, classical Sufi text, is that it can start to seem like these are things that are in the past or of the past. Not only are there texts and poems being written today and practices are going on today, but the texts are alive today. They're alive in Majidi's films, in modern music, but they're just a part of people's lives, and that's what Majidi's films show very well. Yeah, I agree. And about the icon and idol, I mean, there was another kind of debate among the romantics between symbol and allegory that people have become not just disinterested in, but that too, I think, is something to think about. When the world can be symbolic, subject to interpretation. There's a kind of infinite meaning in images. That was a very romantic idea that people have lost interest in. But yeah, I agree. That's why I use Majidi so much in the classroom.
The idea of the icon actually then also reminds me, given what that it seems to me, and we talked about this when we had the session, the book about translating wisdom, Shankar's work about translating. When we were talking about the avatar. So one of the things about modernity is, of course, that the whole idea of manifestation. I mean, it's remarkable that a while back there was many years ago there was a tweet by ISIS, by Daesh, in which they said that they wanted to destroy the Kaaba because it was idolatry. Yeah. So any idea, I mean, it seems to me that's the logical track. Yeah. So you have to wipe out all traces of manifestation, the very concept of manifestation, actually. So because for a manifestation has to manifest something, but there is nothing beyond right, the visible.
It also makes me think of, I mean, here in America, anytime one of those cartoons in France would come out, about the Prophet Muhammad, there'd be worldwide anger and outrage. I mean, one of the ways it would be covered is that, well, Muslims don't depict Muhammad in pictures. They don't ever show it in pictures. And we all know that that's just blatantly false. But I think it's really interesting that I think Majidi's interest in starting this trilogy, which we don't know if he'll do on the Prophet Muhammad, his interest in starting with the child image of Muhammad, I think really comes from that famous picture of Muhammad as a young man that you'll see everywhere in Iran. There's a kind of purity to it and beauty to it, and you can see it kind of brought out throughout the film. So I think pictures of Muhammad, are very significant culturally.
I mean, the irony with that famous picture is that it seems to be a colonial picture from North Africa, doesn't it? From the early 20th century. So it's rather bizarre how that's suddenly been adopted as some image of the young prophet.
Do you know if that image is adopted outside of Iran as well? I don't.
I haven't seen it, but I remember coming across this a while ago, and it does seem to have been a colonial image from, I think, Morocco.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah, but I just wonder if anyone else has, like if anywhere else in the world people attribute it and say, well, this is a young.
No, I don't know, but I mean, I guess Christy Gruber would be the person to ask.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know that.
Well, it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, it does seem to be the case that in modernity, I wouldn't say this as much about the past, but in modernity, it's more difficult to dislodge the idea of manifestation from Shiism. The extent to which it is central to Shiism. But otherwise, I think, as you know, I mean, more and more in the modern period, in large parts of the Muslim world, the image has become problematic in a way that it was not before.
Yeah. I think one of the things about image on a religious level we don't talk enough about, and it's very, very prevalent in Shia Islam, is what Ibn Arabi says, which is sort of using the imagination as a form of dhikr. You can because the imagination has this power to give form to meaning, right? And this is in Shi'i memorials, Karbala. I think generally speaking, Muslims should take an interest in it. I think there's a powerful way where you can use the imagination in a variety of ways, in many, many rituals and practices. You can use the imagination to enhance and even perfect, the experience, the spirituality. So I think it's a very interesting comment.
Well, after all, I mean, the Ghazal, everybody knows that's one of the central motifs of the Ghazal is that the beloved stands in for God.
Right.
The image of beauty itself points towards divinity. It's like a platitude, practically.
Yeah.
But of course, the Ghazal has also not fared very well in the modern period. It's come to be dominated by the Nazm.
Yeah.
So let me, when we're talking about film and medium and images and so forth, I mean, we live in the age of TikTok and Instagram, right? Which is almost by the very definition, it's this ephemeral image.
Yeah.
So how do you use that medium of the ephemeral image to convey spirituality? I mean, do you think it's the same as film as such, or is there something specific? I mean, a 30-second kind of visual meme or a 30-second, TikTok film is something quite different, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it. I mean, so there's a way that. Well, am I echoing?
No, you're okay.
I think there's a meme-ish culture, right, around TikTok, less Twitter, but Instagram. There's a kind of, I don't think anything can come of that. That is late capitalism. That is the achievement of postmodern thinking. I see it with my children too. I mean, it is by nature meaningless. It is a commentary on the form, right? It's the thing commenting on itself. Now, insofar as they're just media, I mean, they are, that's where people are using them to share poems, bits of sermons, poetry, even icons, and yeah, sure. But that's really just like, you could send the same thing on email, you could send the same thing through a text message, or that's just using it as there's a culture surrounding it, and the culture surrounding it is the full blossoming of what Guy Debord and Walter Benjamin and all of them predicted would happen. The vitiation of human thought, the removal from appreciating natural engagement with humans' natural surroundings to a preference for artificial, to the artificial. I mean, it's our reality that we live in. We're all affected by it.
I think actually quite a bit of time on Facebook. Personally, I know you don't participate very much. Cyrus.
I'm sorry if I haven't responded. I have been
off.
No.
That's not what I'm bringing up. I'm just,
I just apologize to anybody who's been messaging me on Facebook.
No.
Logged in. I logged in for months.
No. I know that. I know because different people post different stuff on your wall, and you don't know that they've posted stuff on your wall.
Probably close the account.
It's generous of you to let everybody post on your wall, which is also interesting. That's not the reason I brought it up. What I'm saying is that there are many different kinds of memes. I understand that it's a disaster. It's a cognitive catastrophe. In fact, just as you are saying, I agree that it's a cognitive catastrophe that we are living through amongst so many other catastrophes that we are living through. Yeah. But there are iconic memes, I would say. There are also, there very, very interesting kinds of memes that you can find. So, within the matrix, right? Within the matrix itself, what choice do we have? Except, well, there are, I don't want to say that. As we'll see, I'm sure, actually, inshallah, in this series, there are also other options. But nevertheless, this remains one sort of, if we're going to use if one is allowed to use like a Foucauldian way of thinking about this kind of field of battle. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in that, there are options within even the meme culture. You can use memes to. I come across all kinds of really brilliant memes which are quite abyssal.
Yeah.
So
I have to respond. I mean, I agree. So I hope I wasn't too hard on it. I think it's a new kind of modality of being and communication and culture. It is our reality, and as such, I mean, I don't think there's much that we can do. I think that what will result is what's resulted in the past, because this was ongoing. When I was a child, it was about television. It was all about the kids and TV, and I watched a lot of TV. And so, none of them are sort of absolute evils. I remember my father telling me about when his own father got rid of their radio. So, I mean, there's probably every generation has dealt with this further move away to kind of immediacy and what they saw as something contrary to a kind of more natural human existence. But I think what happens in each of these cases, as you move more toward image centrism, is that the person is forced to develop this split personality, where their engagement with meaning and words and meaningful words and thought and nature and whatever spirituality exists here, and then they kind of let loose, and there's this other kind of mode of existence that happens here, and they're able to kind of control it and keep it in its proper place. I think that's what that's how all of us have deal with it, or most of us deal with it, and the two might intersect and intertwine,
And that's precisely why it's difficult to convey what spirituality means to students who perhaps don't have that compartmentalized sort of life. I think that's precisely it. But yeah, I mean, I think Nauman, you're kind of going against the spirit of the meme. I mean, the whole point of the meme is it's kind of there for a few likes and then you move on, right? So if you want to bestow on it a greater status, then it's kind of like, it's a bit like someone taking TikTok too seriously.
But the fact of the matter is that it is, it's transforming the world. That's what's happening. So the question is, what can you do within the medium, which is an extraordinarily powerful medium at this point? I'm saying that, just as was the case, after all, even Benjamin, when he was talking about cinema, they were looking for, options without cinema. I saw that just recently they released a film which the Nazis had seized. It's going to come out soon. So, there was, in fact, quite a bit of enthusiasm about the emancipatory potential they saw the dangers, but also saw simultaneously the emancipatory potential. Now, I'm not going to make that kind of argument. I'm also, like you, much more pessimistic about these media. But then I'm also much more pessimistic about the world in general. Yeah, research is not it's out of control. Yeah,
but I think. Listen, I think from my perspective, mitigating the artifice of modern life is just something that we've gotten used to. So for example, the gym, exercise, the idea of a portion of your day being devoted to exercise is a result of a sedentary lifestyle that needs that. And camping, going into nature, and Boy Scouts, as we have in America, and Girl Scouts. I mean, this is a result again of the artificial life, and so on and so forth. And I think the meme, online, TikTok, all of that, it's changing culture in a major way. I notice it with my children, and one of them is just the self-commentary. It's gotten to a point where it's stacked so much. I mean, the songs that children like, they like because of the irony. So they'll go back to a song from the 1980s because it's corny, because it's weird, it's very odd. But that's just a natural cultural shift. And I think that the image centrism will again be mitigated by basically a form of exercise, a form of dealing with it.
Well, in terms of this theme that Sajjad has brought up a couple of times about education and how to communicate this other world. Well, first of all, this word that Cyrus has been repeating, which is meaning. I mean, nobody can deny that there is meaning. After all, we communicate with each other, there is meaning. And where is it exactly? Yeah. So in modernity, despite how modern we have become, meaning has not disappeared. It continues to exist. And where is that exactly? That whole dimension is just immediately, nobody can deny its existence, minimally. Yeah. But what that implies then, what does the existence of the world of meaning imply then, ontologically, and about and beyond, ethically also? That then is another matter. But you can begin by pointing this once again, these things that sit in plain sight. Yeah. What are they going to do about meaning? Right? How are they ever going to get rid of that?
But I mean, that's because a lot of these kind of classical, metaphysical binaries don't get necessarily resolved in a particular way, right? So if you take things like transcendence and immanence, you can't get to a point where everything is immanent without that being meaningless, right? And similarly, between if you have this idea of form and meaning, or something which bears the meaning and meaning, if you reduce everything to what is apparent, then again it doesn't really work. A zahid without a batin doesn't work. It's as simple as that. And so in some ways, one would expect some sort of further stage of a backlash, right? So if a TikTok kind of culture goes so far, and let's be clear, I mean, yes, this is a global thing, but there are other ways of being. And if we're thinking about decolonial options, then it's like, well, what is the alternative, right? It's universal, but it doesn't mean it's everywhere, exactly. And what might come to replace it? We're beginning to realize simple things. What happens when you have shortages of petrol and gas? What if there's not stuff on the shelves? What if you don't have Wi-Fi or 5G so you can even watch the TikTok video, right? Those sorts of, and when that becomes more and more common, which of course it will be because of the basic climate emergency we're living in, and all sorts of shortages, and the fact that there are too many people who live in the world, etc., then humans are going to have to find different ways of doing things. And they're going to have to engage with the question of meaning in a different manner.
That's true. I also wonder how much, I mean, think about climate change or the pandemic, and both can push people indoors, and then all you have is the internet, and I think that's the other interesting thing. I mean, during the pandemic, most of us, we lived our lives, at least for a number of months, online, and so it's strange. I think it's precipitated the shift. But you're right. What happens if the resources dry up? I mean, what would have happened if you would have had the pandemic without the internet? I think that's the interesting question. I can tell you that I would worry about, at least where I live, about, you know, a serious kind of mayhem.
Well, there would be like it'd be like the Purge
Yeah.
on the streets.
I don't know. Yeah.
or some
Funny,
sort of zombie film or something like that. Yeah.
Huh.
it just made me think, actually, despite the fact that I've spent so much of my life online, not just during this pandemic, but even before, I've never had a dream about the internet or computers or anything like that. I've never had a dream in which I'm online. I don't know about you.
No, I don't think I have either. I'll tell you something funny. And I don't know if we've gone on too long or anything, but I think I don't remember if I was in the 8th grade, but I was very young, and it was when they were first talking about the internet. And I said famously to my brother, I said, "This internet thing is such a fad." I said, why would anyone want to sit at home behind a computer? You know, like you can go outside, you can. So I was very wrong about that. It was definitely not a fad.
All right. You know, there's so many interesting things on the table, and I'd like to personally talk for a long time, but I think we've gone on for a while. Sajjad?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen any questions coming in. Really, there's a very specific question about the relationship between sons and fathers in the films, and also there's a reference to the comparison with separation, but I think that's quite specific and it might kind of take a bit long to deal with.
Well, as you might have lost some viewers because I went on so long, but I should say to everyone, in my apology, I had planned this and timed it, and it was only supposed to be 35 minutes, but I don't know what happened. So my apologies to everyone for going over.
No, not at all, please.
No, that's good. And actually, you know, if even the simple thing is that people actually go off and watch these films, I think that'll be quite interesting. And I mean, I don't want to keep us, but can I just quickly ask you why you don't like the Majidi film on the Prophet?
Yes.
Because people might be interested in that.
Well, okay, I'll say. So I see the 3 best Majidi films, in my opinion. The three that capture what I was talking about today, the words on screen idea, are the 2 that I mentioned plus Bought On. So if you're gonna, in my opinion, if you're gonna watch 3, those are 3 to watch: Bought On, and these 2. And if you think about everything I said, right, it was this kind of spiritual allegory, and I think that's what I don't like about his version of the Prophet Muhammad film, is that he's gone from this kind of spiritual allegory. You can find the Prophet Muhammad in modern life, you can find the Quran in modern life, you can find the Rumi in modern life, to, okay, let's just talk about the Prophet Muhammad. And that changes everything, because then it goes from spiritual allegory and comment on modernity and all of that to being something like, you know, it has a kind of Sunday schoolish feel to it. It's, you know, it's something preachy, something that's not religious allegory, but just religious, you know, and that's fine for what it is. But when you're following a filmmaker and he's doing something really exciting and interesting, and then he stops doing it, you know, I think that's where the disappointment comes in. Plus, I just have my doubts that I'll be honest, I'll be frank. I don't think that the Prophet or you know, the Imams, or I don't think they should be on film, and not because of some, like, you know, Protestant or you know, reformist kind of anger issues that I have. I think that as an artistic medium, that's film's limitation, is that it cannot transmit meaning in that way, and that's my own personal bias. But I don't think that film can be used in that way successfly. And I know it's going to be very unpopular, but I think
you might be right about that. But I've watched that film about the Prophet a couple of times, and I personally really enjoy it. And the reason for that is that it really brings out both the very contemplative character of the Prophet, but also very delicate and subtle and sensitive child. It's only about the childhood of the Prophet. And what it shows is actually, as a child, and that the Prophet is extremely sensitive, he's subtle, and he's very contemplative. So that journey, and also there are these, as you were saying earlier about Medina, a very sensual kind of, I mean, with the fruit flowing through the,
it's beautiful.
through the streams in Medina, the whole thing, and that actually has kind of an allegorical, feel to it.
There's definitely symbols and allegories in it. It's a beautiful film. I mean, honestly, I have asked people to watch that film just for the way that Mecca is recreated, the way Medina is recreated, the image, the images, the cinematography. I mean, the whole Mecca was rebuilt for that film. It's worth seeing on all those levels. But I could never talk about any of the issues that I'm talking about today in talking about that film. It is just, at the end of the day, it is just a kind of welcome to the Prophet Muhammad kind of, film.
Speaking of Baran, which you just mentioned earlier, sorry, I'm just curious to know about your thoughts about this. So I've spoken about Baran more. It's really the other really gorgeous, absolutely beautiful. I was wondering if the Attar quote that you were talking about at the beginning of your talk, was that from Baran?
No, I don't think so. But I have to remember. What I'd say about Baran is this. Nauman, you had mentioned the Ghazal. And I think that of his films, the film that captures the Ghazal, is Baran. It's a love story. The others are not. But it does it in this, I mean, it's astounding. And think about what he's able to do. He's able to, at the same time as he's commenting on the human experience of love, the ideas of losing the ego and losing the self in love as a kind of spiritual perfection. He's talking about all these deep concepts, but think about on the other level in the film, you have the refugee crisis, issues of poverty. You have all of that brought together. And that's brilliant. Yeah, it's brilliant. It's a brilliant film.
Amazing. The cobbler, actually, the beautiful moment when the protagonist goes to the cobbler and the cobbler recites a couplet, a distich. And the kid is shocked. He's like, wow, this guy has looked into my heart. And it's a share from a ghazal.
Yeah.
I don't. So I was wondering if you recall who's shared that.
I can't remember. It's been a while since I've seen it, but I mean, you can definitely see that film as just being, I mean, if someone didn't understand how the classical ghazal worked and the relationships in it worked, and you said, okay, well, just watch this film and you'll understand, Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Sajjad.
Thank you for having me. I'm sorry for going over. And it's really good.
No, it's actually pretty much on the dot of how long we normally go for. So that's
okay, good.
It's a shame we didn't have much coming in from the audience, but maybe next time. Let me just tell the audience about the next talk, which actually is 1 week from now. And we'll have Babak Rahimi from UC San Diego talking about, the title is Writing Muharram, and it's going to be on cultural representation in Iran. So please do join us for the next one. And the list, of course, of our events for this term, the seminar series is also up on Facebook, so you'll find it there, and on Instagram as well. So hopefully see you then, all of you, and thank you once again to Cyrus.
Thank you, Cyrus.